And I think if I think about baseball, it's almost the same thing. If I think about baseball movies or baseball books, the story's always bigger. You know, like Bull Durham is like sex and love. It's bigger than baseball. So I think, you know, when I saw that, when she sees that guy standing alone on that field, you know, I wasn't necessarily, I don't know what I was thinking. You know, maybe she and I were surprised to see him at the same time, you know, and whether or not he was even really there.
So you were just along for the ride, is what you're saying?
You know, we're all in the bus together. Sometimes I'm steering. Any other questions? Kinsey?
Madewell makes a brief appearance in, I think it's Perdido.
Yeah.
Did you have this book in mind? And you
No, man, that was, you know, when he was a walk-on, but the first 6 pages are his in Perdido. He was just a walk-on character, and then he's more or less just disappears. But when I finished that book, he always stuck in my head. It was like, who was this guy? And, you know, then I went on and wrote another novel, but, you know, I never forgot Madewell. And at some point in time, I realized he was a Negro League baseball player who had left out of disillusionment or age or just being worn down, left his team. You know, and once I had that, I had the concept for the story. But it was a struggle in some ways because, you know, I had. I mean, sometimes you can get stuck with what you can do and what you can't do. And there's a scene in this book where his granddaughter finds the house Madewell had lived in. But in Perdido, at the end of Madewell's section, an old man tells a character that the house had been torn down. And so, for me, it was like I had written the rules 10 years before. And it took me a while to realize, well, maybe that old guy was lying. I mean, whose rules, you know what I mean? But when I finished Perdido, Madewell Brown was in my head for a long time. And this was, of all the books, for as slighted as it is, it was the toughest for me. This book was hard. I mean, it was supposed to be Madewell Brown's book. And it wasn't until and I kept writing Rachel as an adult, and you know, this young black woman, and I was having a horrible time. I mean, it was flat, and it wasn't until one day the first line of the book hit me. Of all of them, Obie Poole was the only one who ever came back, and it was like bam, you know, the book came off, or the book took off, and then I nailed Rachel as a young girl. And I realized it had absolutely nothing to do with culture, that I'd never had a character. You know, I didn't have a character to take me through this book. And that must have been a year. I mean, I was like writing blind for a year with, you know, and some of it is just not having, you know, I think my process is, you know, I don't outline, so I'm just going. And I can often be on the wrong horse.
Who could you most relate to of all the characters you put in that book?
Who could I most relate to? Oh God, you know, probably Cipriano. You know, you know, he was about, I don't know, 35-year-old Hispanic guy. I mean, I think when I'm writing them, I can be all of them, but you know, there was something about him. I mean, nice guy, but he was kind of raised in a vacuum about his family. Totally raised in a vacuum about his family's past, his entire family's history. You know, one day everything is fine, and the next day he inherits a story that just kind of changes everything. You know.
But I will ask, yeah, it seems like secrets are kind of a underlying theme in these books. Could you talk to that? Yeah, where that comes from?
Well, it certainly is. I guess it is. Yeah, I guess it is in all of them. I don't know. You know, I always wanted to be a mystery writer. Perdido was supposed to be a mystery. And it failed miserably as a mystery. But I was always struck by like reading Raymond Chandler and guys like that, where what went wrong like generations before. And it just, I've always been struck by the ghosts from the past coming back, and I'm not, I guess they are secrets. And, you know, and even in Asanto, in the image of Cristobal Garcia, it's really all about Flavio, who has no understanding of who his family is, you know, and it's been hidden from him, you know, and he doesn't recall any of it until he's an old man. So I'm not sure why that plays a part. You know, I think if I had one underlying theme that I've noticed, it's the concept of place, and it's the concept of being out of place. And it's the thought of, it's the desire to want a place and never fitting in, whether it's in the village or the community or even in your family. And that seems to surface a lot. And you know, this is really, I mean, Rachel pretty much finds her place. Both of them do, by the end of this thing. You know, I mean, it's been fun staying in the same village. There was, I mean, all 4 books take place in Guadalupe, and when I wrote the 3rd book, I burned the village down, pretty much to get out of there. I mean, I felt like I had to burn it down to leave, you know, and I struggled a long time with this set somewhere else. You know, it just didn't work, and it wasn't until I shifted back to Guadalupe where I got a handle on it. But you know, it's kind of like living in the same town where, you know, every day you may see somebody, but that's not the story of your day. You know, I know Flavio Montoya has become my Alfred Hitchcock. He's got a walk-on scene, whether he's standing in the field or whatever, and it's cool. Yeah. You know, somebody, you know, I think, when I think back, you know, this one I had Negro League Baseball, and my concept for Asanto was I wanted to tell the history of the village and then burn it down. And that was my running thesis. And the 3rd book, in Perdido, somebody told me a story about this girl hanging from a bridge, and that became that book. And I had a similar thing with the journal. And somebody recently, about a year ago, told me a story about when she was like a 12-year-old girl. They were standing in front of some hedges in Oklahoma, and she was standing with her friend. Her friend's sister took this photograph of them, and when they looked at the Polaroid, and the person who's telling the story is like sane. I mean, she's not crazy. She said, in the background was a werewolf. I said, what do you mean there was a werewolf? She said, there was a werewolf. I said, there was a man. She said, there was a werewolf. I said, it was the configuration of the leaves. And she said, it was a werewolf! I said, well, what happened? And she said, I don't remember. But, you know, I've been stuck with a stupid image, man. These 2 little girls, something looming behind them. So, I'm sorry. This one could take 10 years.